March 9, 1945, a cluster of farmhouses east of Remagen, Germany. The world has been reduced to the color of mud and the sound of thunder. For 19-year-old Liesl Bauer, a junior auxiliary in the Luftwaffe Women's Service, that thunder is no longer distant. It's a physical force, a vibration that works its way through the soles of her worn leather boots and up into her bones. 2 days ago, the Americans seized the Ludendorff Bridge. 2 days ago, the final desperate defense of the Rhine began to crumble. Now, the Wehrmacht is no longer an army. It is a torrent of broken men and machines flowing east, away from the front. Liesl is a single drop in that torrent. Her unit, a flak battery tasked with defending the approaches to the bridge, had simply ceased to exist. One moment, she was feeding 88mm shells into the breach alongside girls her age and old men from the Volkssturm. The next, a direct hit from artillery turned her world into a nightmare of screaming metal and vaporized earth. When she came to, the gun was a mangled sculpture of steel, the crew was gone, and the only order was one of unspoken primal instinct: survive. Run. For a day and a night she has been moving through a landscape of ghosts. The skeletal remains of Panzer IV sit resting in the ditches, their crews long fled or entombed inside. Columns of exhausted soldiers, their faces hollowed out by fear and sleeplessness, trudge past her without a word. Their eyes are glass. There is no command, no structure, only a shared, shambling retreat. You can smell the war before you see it. It is the scent of wet pine, churned earth, and cordite, all overlaid with the sweet, cloying odor of death that clings to the cold March air. Every snap of a twig in the dense woods is the bolt of an American M1 rifle. Every rumble is not the approaching storm, but the low-frequency growl of Sherman tank treads chewing up German soil. Her Luftwaffe gray uniform, once a source of pride, is now a target. The scratchy wool greatcoat is heavy with rain, pulling at her shoulders, a constant reminder of what she is: a soldier on the losing side, an enemy in her own homeland. But there is a single burning thought that propels her forward, a beacon in the chaos: home. Her family's farm is only 5 kilometers from here. It is a place of warm kitchens, of worn wooden floors, of safety. It is the only anchor left in a world that has come completely unmoored. As dusk bleeds across the sky, painting the low clouds in shades of violet and bruised gray, she finally sees it: the familiar slope of the roof, the dark shape of the barn against the tree line. Relief, so powerful it almost brings her to her knees, washes over her. She stumbles out of the woods, a scarecrow figure in a filthy uniform, and breaks into a clumsy run across the fallow field. Her heart hammers against her ribs, not with fear, but with a desperate, childish hope. She reaches the heavy oak door of the house, her hands shaking as she pounds on the wood. "Mutter, Vati, it's me, Liesl." The silence that answers is heavier than any artillery barrage. She pounds again, her voice cracking. "Please, let me in." Finally, a bolt scrapes back. The door cracks open a few inches. In the sliver of space is the face of her mother, Frau Bauer. But the eyes that meet hers are not filled with love or relief. They are wide with terror. Her mother's gaze darts past Liesl toward the dark woods from which she emerged, as if expecting a legion of American soldiers to follow. "Go away," her mother whispers, the words like shards of ice. "You cannot be here. You will bring them down on us." Liesl stares, uncomprehending. This is her mother. This is her home. "Mutter, please," she begs, her voice dissolving into a sob. "I have nowhere else." Her father's shape appears behind her mother, his face a grim mask of resignation and fear. He doesn't speak. He simply places a hand on his wife's shoulder and gently pushes the door forward. "They will kill us for helping a soldier," her mother hisses, her voice thick with panic. "Go, now!" The door clicks shut. The bolt slides home. Liesl stands on the doorstep, her fists still raised as if to knock again, but the strength has gone out of them. The warmth she had imagined, the safety she had craved, was a mirage. She is an outcast, a danger, a piece of the war her own family wants to discard. She turns slowly, facing the dark field. The sound of thunder is closer now, and it is definitely not the weather.
The betrayal is a cold, dense weight in her stomach, heavier than hunger, more profound than fear. Liesl Bauer stumbles away from the farmhouse, each step an act of will. She does not look back. There is nothing there for her to see. The night offers no comfort, only an inky blackness that conceals 1,000 imagined threats. She finds shelter in a dilapidated hunting stand at the edge of the woods, huddling in the corner as a bone-chilling rain begins to fall. Sleep is impossible. Every gust of wind carries the phantom shouts of American soldiers. Every rustle in the undergrowth is the approach of a patrol. The world has shrunk to this tiny, rotting box of wood, and she is utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her uniform is no longer a symbol of service. It is a shroud she cannot remove. By dawn, the numbness has given way to a dull, aching resignation. The distant rumble has become a constant, ground-shaking roar. The American advance is not coming. It is here. Peeking through a crack in the boards, she sees them. A column of olive-drab vehicles, monstrous GMC trucks, and smaller, wasp-like jeeps are grinding their way down the muddy track that passes for a road. Soldiers walk alongside them, their silhouettes sharp and alien. They carry their M1 Garands with a casual readiness that speaks of weeks of relentless combat. These are the men from the propaganda posters, the invaders Goebbels had warned them about. Yet they look tired. Their faces are smeared with mud and exhaustion, not too different from the German soldiers she had seen in retreat. Hunger, a gnawing, insistent pain, finally forces her from her hiding place. She has to move, to find something, anything. She decides to follow a small creek, hoping it will lead her away from the main road. She moves in a half-crouch, her body screaming with fatigue. The world is a blur of gray bark and brown leaves. She doesn't hear them until it's too late. 3 figures emerge from the trees, fanning out, their rifles raised. "Halt! Hands up! Now!" The English words are sharp, guttural, a language she barely understands, but whose meaning is brutally clear. Her hands fly into the air, a reflexive gesture of surrender. Her heart feels like it has stopped beating. They close in on her. They are huge, clad in gear and webbing that makes them seem inhuman. The one in the lead, a sergeant with tired but sharp eyes and 3 chevrons on his sleeve, keeps his rifle trained on her chest. He is Sergeant Frank Miller of the 9th Armored Division's Combat Command B. For the past 3 weeks, he and his men have been fighting their way through the Hürtgen forest, and now across the Rhine. They have seen friends die. They have grown accustomed to the sight of German soldiers, some defiant to the last, others surrendering in droves. But this is different. A girl. She can't be more than a kid, swimming in a too large Luftwaffe greatcoat, her face pale and streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a care that transcends language. One of the other soldiers, a private named O'Malley, prods her forward with the barrel of his rifle. "Just a kid, Sarge," he says, his voice a low murmur. "What's she, Flockhelferin?" Miller doesn't answer. He just nods, his expression unreadable. "Get her back with the others." They march her back toward the road, her hands still held high. She expects a blow, a shove to the ground, the violence she had been taught to expect. Instead, their movements are rough but efficient, impersonal. They are processing an asset, a piece of the enemy war machine. They search her, finding nothing but a small worn photograph of her family, the same family that had shut the door on her, which they glance at and thrust back into her pocket. She is herded into a makeshift collection point in a muddy field with 24 other captured German soldiers. There are old men from the Volkssturm, their faces etched with the confusion of civilians forced into a fight they could not win, and a handful of young, hollow-eyed Wehrmacht regulars. They are all silent, standing under the watchful eyes of their American captors. Liesel feels 1,000 eyes on her, the only woman in the group. She tries to make herself small, to disappear into the gray backdrop of defeat. An American officer with a clipboard arrives, shouting out names and numbers, his voice impatient. He gestures to the prisoners, barking orders to the guards. They begin separating the group. A few of the Wehrmacht soldiers are pulled aside for interrogation. The old men are pushed toward a waiting truck. Then the officer's eyes land on Liesel. He stares for a moment, then points directly at her. "That one," he says to Sergeant Miller. "Take her to the schoolhouse. G2 wants to ask the auxiliaries a few questions." Miller gives a curt nod, his face betraying nothing. But for Liesel, being singled out feels like a death sentence.
The schoolhouse smells of chalk dust, damp wool, and stale cigarette smoke. It has been hastily converted into a forward command post for a platoon from the 9th Armored. Maps are pinned to the blackboards, and a humming radio set sits on the teacher's desk, crackling with disembodied voices speaking in English codes. They lead Liesel into an empty classroom. The small wooden desks and chairs, designed for children, look grotesque in this new context. A single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling casts a harsh yellow light, making the room feel more like an operating theater than a place of learning. The air is frigid, and Liesel can see her breath misting in front of her. The cold seeps into her, a deep internal chill that has nothing to do with the March weather and everything to do with the absolute uncertainty of her fate. Sergeant Miller posts a guard at the door and then enters the room, closing it behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place is deafeningly loud. He gestures for her to sit in one of the small chairs. She obeys, perching on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. He doesn't sit. He stands by the window, looking out at the rain-swept courtyard, his back to her. He pulls a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes from his helmet band, taps one out, and lights it with a Zippo lighter that clicks open and shut with a familiar metallic rasp. The silence stretches, thick with unspoken tension. Liesel watches him, studying the back of his mud-caked uniform, the powerful set of his shoulders. This man holds her life in his hands. He could be kind, or he could be cruel. She has no way of knowing which. He is not an intelligence officer. He is a combat infantryman. His job is to fight, to take ground, and to stay alive. Interrogating prisoners is not his specialty, but the G2 officer is busy with a captured Wehrmacht captain, so Miller has been tasked with babysitting. He is tired down to his soul. The faces of the dead, both American and German, have started to blur together in his memory. He turns from the window and finally looks at her. He sees the way she shivers, not just from the cold, but with a deep, convulsive tremor of fear. He sees the dirt caked under her fingernails and the raw red friction burns on her neck from the collar of her wool coat. He sees a girl who looks younger than his own sister back in Ohio. He had been taught to see the uniform, not the person, but right now that is becoming difficult. He walks over to a small field stove set up in the corner of the room, where a blackened pot of coffee is kept perpetually warm. Without a word, he pours a steaming, dark liquid into a tin cup and walks over to her. He holds it out. Liesel flinches, her eyes wide, expecting him to throw it in her face. She has heard stories. But he just waits, his expression unchanging. Hesitantly, she reaches out and takes the cup. Her fingers brush against him, and she is surprised by the warmth. The tin is hot, almost painfully so, but the heat is a welcome shock, a small point of life in the frozen landscape of her fear. He then reaches into one of the large pockets of his field jacket and pulls out a small wax-coated box, a K-ration. He opens it, takes out a dense rectangular biscuit and a small chocolate bar, and places them on the desk in front of her. Essen, he says. Eat. It is one of the few German words he knows. Liesel stares at the food, then up at him. She doesn't understand. This is not the behavior of the brutal enemy from the propaganda films. This is something else, something she cannot process. Her stomach growls, a loud, embarrassing noise in the quiet room. She looks at the food again, then back at his face. His eyes are not cruel. They are just tired, deeply, profoundly tired. She slowly picks up the biscuit and takes a small, hesitant bite. It is dry and tasteless, but it is food. It is sustenance. As she chews, a single hot tear escapes and rolls down her cheek, leaving a clean track in the grime. It is the first act of human kindness she has received since her world fell apart. It is a gesture so small and yet so fast it cracks the armor of her despair. The door opens abruptly, breaking the spell. The G2 officer, a lean, sharp-faced lieutenant with an air of cold impatience, strides into the room. He glances at the half-eaten K-ration on the desk, then at Miller, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He ignores Liesel completely, treating her as if she were a piece of furniture. "Sergeant," the lieutenant says, his voice crisp. "We're done here. Transport is moving the prisoners out in 10. Get her on the truck heading for the enclosure at Sinzig." He turns and leaves as quickly as he arrived. Miller's face hardens. Sinzig. He knows what that means. It is not a camp. It is a collection of open-air enclosures, vast holding pens in the muddy fields along the Rhine. The infamous Rheinwiesenlager. No barracks, no shelter. Thousands of prisoners exposed to the elements. For a girl like this, it would be a death sentence. The moment of quiet compassion is over. A far more terrible fate has just been announced.
The lieutenant's order hangs in the cold air of the classroom, a verdict delivered without trial. Sinzig. The name itself is a whisper of mud, disease, and slow starvation. Sergeant Frank Miller crushes his cigarette butt under his boot heel, the small, violent act a poor substitute for the anger tightening its gut. He had followed orders his entire tour, from the bloody hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen hell of the Ardennes. Orders kept you alive. They simplified the world into a series of objectives, but this order feels different. It feels wrong. He looks at Liesel, who is watching him, trying to read his face, oblivious to the name of the place that is now her destination, but keenly aware that the atmosphere in the room has changed, that the fragile truce has been broken. "Let's go," he says, his voice flat. He gestures with his rifle toward the door. The kindness is gone, replaced by the detached authority of a guard. Liesel's brief flicker of hope dies. He is a soldier, after all. She is the enemy. That is the only reality that matters. She stands, leaving the rest of the chocolate bar on the desk, and allows him to escort her out into the rain-slicked courtyard. The world is a hive of activity. Engines roar to life. Men shout orders. A line of German prisoners, their heads bowed against the driving rain, are being herded into the back of a canvas-topped GMC truck. Their faces are a uniform mask of gray despair. Miller directs Liesel toward the back of the truck, and she climbs in, finding a small space on a wooden bench among the silent, defeated men. Miller climbs into the passenger seat of the truck's cab, next to the driver, a young corporal named Jensen. The convoy lurches forward, its tires spinning in the thick mud before finding purchase. Through the rectangular opening at the back of the canvas, Liesel watches the schoolhouse recede. She is just another piece of human cargo, being transported from one cage to the next. The journey is a miserable affair. The truck bounces violently over the rutted, war-torn roads. Rainwater drips through the canvas, and the cold is relentless. Miller sits in the cab, staring out at the ravaged German countryside. He sees burned-out farms, shattered forests, and the occasional group of German civilians watching the American convoy pass, their expressions a mixture of fear and hatred. He thinks about the girl in the back. He can't shake the image of her face when he gave her the coffee. It wasn't gratitude he saw, not exactly. It was profound, shattering surprise, as if the concept of mercy had become entirely alien to her. An hour into the drive, as they navigate a narrow road flanked by dense forest, Miller leans over to the driver. "Pull over up ahead," he says. "Engine's sounding rough. I want to check it." Jensen glances at him, confused. The engine sounds fine, but he knows better than to question a sergeant. He pulls the truck onto the muddy shoulder, the rest of the small convoy continuing down the road ahead of them. "Stay here," Miller tells him. He grabs his M1 Garand, hops down from the cab, and walks to the back of the truck. He unfastens the canvas flap and looks inside. The German prisoners stare back at him, their eyes wary. He points at Liesel. "Raus. You. Out." Her heart leaps into her throat. This is it. This is the moment they take you into the woods. She has heard the rumors from both sides, of prisoners being shot while trying to escape. The other men in the truck avert their eyes, not wanting to witness what is about to happen. Trembling, she slides off the bench and jumps down onto the soft earth. Miller gestures for her to follow him, leading her a few paces away from the truck, toward the tree line. He stops and turns to face her. The rain has lessened to a fine drizzle. The only sound is the idling engine and the drip of water from the pine branches. He doesn't raise his rifle. He leans it against his shoulder. He looks at her, and his expression is no longer that of a guard. It is something far more complicated. He points down a barely visible path leading into the woods. "Bauernhof," he says, using the German word for farmhouse. "Farm. Maybe 2 kilometers. That way." He then points in the opposite direction, back down the road the truck came from. "Sinzig," he says, the name sounding like a curse. "Lager. Camp. Not good. Verstanden? Understand." He reaches into his jacket again, pulling out his last K-ration and a full bar of Hershey's chocolate. He shoves them into her hands. "Lauf," he says, his voice a low, urgent command. "Run." Her mind reels. This can't be happening. It's a trick. A cruel game. She looks from the food in her hands to his face, searching for the lie, for the malice. She finds none. She sees only an exhausted man making a choice that goes against every rule he is supposed to follow. From the truck, the driver, Jensen, honks the horn impatiently. "Sarge, we gotta move." Miller glances back at the truck, then back at her. The decision is no longer his. It is hers. Trust the enemy who has shown her a flicker of kindness, or accept the fate the war has decreed for her.
For a long moment, Liesel is frozen. The forest path looks dark and menacing. The road, for all its horrors, is a known quantity. To run is to embrace a terrifying uncertainty. To stay is to accept a slow, anonymous death in a field of mud. The engine of the GMC truck roars as Jensen ras it, a guttural sound that shatters her paralysis. She looks at Sergeant Miller one last time, a silent, unanswerable question in her eyes. He gives a short, sharp nod, a final, unspoken command. "Lauf." She turns and runs. She plunges into the forest, the branches of pine and fir whipping at her face and clothes. She doesn't dare look back, convinced that the moment she does, she will hear the crack of a rifle and feel the bullet that ends it all. She runs blindly, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and terror, her lungs burning, her boots slipping in the slick mud and wet leaves. The sound of the truck's engine fades behind her, replaced by the frantic pounding of her own heart. It is the most liberating and most terrifying sound she has ever heard. For 10 minutes, she runs without stopping, pushing deeper into the woods until she collapses at the base of a large oak tree, gasping for breath, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. He let her go. He actually let her go. The reality of it is slow to sink in. An American soldier, an enemy, had seen her not as a number or a uniform, but as a person. In the middle of a war built on dehumanization, he had performed an act of radical humanity. Holding the K-ration and the chocolate bar, she follows the path, moving more cautiously now. As the American had promised, after what feels like an hour of walking, the trees begin to thin. Through a break in the foliage, she sees it, a small, isolated farm, nestled in a shallow valley, miraculously untouched by the fighting. A thin plume of smoke rises from its chimney. Hope, a feeling she thought had been extinguished forever, stirs within her. But it is a hope tempered by the fresh memory of her own family's rejection. These are strangers. Why would they help her when her own blood had turned her away? With nowhere else to go, she takes a deep breath and steps out of the woods, walking slowly toward the farmhouse. An old man milking a cow in the barn is the first to see her. His eyes widen in fear at the sight of her Luftwaffe gray uniform. He drops his stool and scuttles toward the house, shouting for his wife. An older woman appears at the door, her face a mask of suspicion. Liesl stops a dozen meters away, raising her empty hands to show she means no harm. "Please," she says, her voice barely a whisper. "I mean no harm. I am alone. I need help." The couple stare at her, a silent debate passing between them. A German soldier appearing on their doorstep is trouble. It means questions, complications, potential retribution from the occupying Americans. The woman's gaze, however, softens as she takes in the girl's appearance, the youthful face, the exhaustion, the desperation in her eyes. This is not a soldier. This is a child, lost in the wreckage of a war made by old men. The woman nods slowly. "Komm rein," she says. "Come inside. Schnell, before you are seen." Inside, the farmhouse is warm and smells of wood smoke and baking bread. They give her a bowl of hot potato soup, and she eats it so fast she nearly chokes. They ask no questions about where she came from or how she got there. They simply see a human being in need. The woman, whose name is Elfriede, leads her to a small attic room. She gives Liesl a simple cotton dress, one that belonged to her own daughter who now lives in a city far away. "Burn this," Elfriede says, pointing to Liesl's uniform. That night, Liesl watches from the small attic window as her gray greatcoat, the symbol of her former life, curls into ash in the farm's incinerator. With it, the girl who was a soldier vanishes, and a survivor begins to emerge. In the weeks that follow, the war rages on, then finally gutters out. The sound of artillery is replaced by the rumble of American supply trucks on the main roads. Liesl remains at the farm, helping the old couple with their chores, slowly healing from wounds both visible and invisible. She never learns Sergeant Miller's name. He becomes a nameless, faceless figure in her memory, a ghost of mercy on a muddy road. His single choice did not alter the grand sweep of history. It did not stop a single battle or save a single city, but it saved her world. In the great, dark tapestry of the Second World War, woven with threads of grand strategy, immense suffering, and unspeakable brutality, there were other threads too. Small, almost invisible threads of individual choice, of compassion that defied orders, of a shared humanity that refused to be extinguished. For Liesl Bauer, and for countless others in moments unrecorded and unknown, it was these small, fragile threads that made it possible to imagine a dawn after the long, dark night.